So you may or may not have noticed I took a few creative liberties when I retold the story to our children. Jesus didn't necessarily go to the temple because he felt he was going to be safe there, but he didn't not go to the temple because he was going to be safe there. But this is a story filled with ambiguity and with empty space, where we can sit in and we can speculate as to why Jesus left his parents and why he went to the temple and why Jesus was able to ask such great questions of the teachers at the temple at just the age of 12. But as someone who is actively a part of youth ministry, I can tell you our children have tremendous insight into the way God is at work in our world. The trick is giving them a space where they feel comfortable enough to tell you what they think about their relationship with God or what they believe about Jesus. And there's a lot of things that we can talk about in this text. There's a lot of things we can speculate about and wonder about. But there are two things in this text that seem to be the main themes to me. At least they seem to be the main themes today for me. I said this last night at the Saturday service, but this is true pretty much every time I talk about a scriptural text. We often change what we think about a scripture depending on where we are at in our lives, where we are at in the week, or even where we are at in that moment. The scriptures are multifaceted. We can turn them and twist them in different ways and get different answers depending on what we do. So when Quincy or I get up here, he might have a little more confidence in what he's saying than I do, but I like to think that for today, this is what I think is most important about the text. And maybe that will change next week, maybe that will change next year, but for today, this is what I find important. And there are two things that show up in this text that I think are the main focus here, which is when Jesus turns to his mother and she says, "You have been causing your father and I some intense stress. We have been looking for you for 3 days. Possibly 5 days, depending on how you read the text. It was a day's travel. It was a day's travel back. Did they find him the next day or 3 days after that? It's Greek. And Greek is just not great for translating into English, at least not biblical Greek. And so we don't know how long they've been looking for him. If you lost your child for 3 days, you would be very stressed. We even have a Christmas movie about it, Home Alone. We're not going to talk about Home Alone for this morning. But Jesus' response to his mother Mary is what interests me. And he says to her, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I would be here in my Father's house? Or depending on your translation, did you not know I would be here doing my Father's work in my Father's business?" And the great thing about written language is also the annoying thing about written language, which we do not have tone. You have just heard me read this one way, which is the way we like to read it. But imagine it being read by a sassy 12-year-old child who has just been separated from his parents for 3 days. "Why are you even looking for me? Didn't you know I'd be here in my Father's house?" Is Jesus being a sassy 12-year-old tween boy, or is he being the calm, collected child of God who is about to focus on his ministry? This is the question that I think is perhaps most interesting in this morning's text to me, because we can go both ways with it. When I was reading commentaries on this text to try and see what other theologians had to say, what other people who have spent far more time with the Greek language and with this text might have to say about it, I came across a commentary from a theologian by the name of Luke Timothy Johnson. And he's a very well-known New Testament scholar, and maybe unsurprisingly, his specialty is the Gospel of Luke, which is his own name. And when we look at this text, he brings up something that I think is quite interesting, which is that this story, despite lacking any supernatural elements, is still an important part of the gospel story for Jesus. Luke has Jesus tell parables and do miracles when he becomes an adult, and in this moment, Jesus doesn't really do either. He's just a child who is at the temple. And he makes a strong argument for this being a story that is in the Bible because it's normal. Because an average 12-year-old Jewish boy would be at the appropriate age for his bar mitzvah to become an official member of the community. And so he would need to go to Passover. He would need to go to the festivals, to the high holy days at the temple in Jerusalem. That this would be something normal for any family who has a 11 to 14-year-old child, to be making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to be going to the temple, to be listening to the teachers, asking them questions. That there is a strong argument that this story is here simply to show us that Jesus is like the rest of us. That Jesus, despite the supernatural events around his birth, is a normal 12-year-old Jewish boy who goes to the festivals in Jerusalem, who is learning from the teachers, and who, when he hits his 30s, will become his own independent member of society. It seems a little strange to us now in a modern context when we send our kids off to college after high school or they get a job immediately afterwards, that someone would begin their independence at the age of 30. But I don't think it's that unusual, at least not for some of us. My brother went to college, and he went to law school, and then he worked at the courthouse in my hometown for several years before he moved to California to be with his girlfriend, who is now his fiancée. This part of the story is crafted carefully by Luke. Luke is not wasteful. He uses the most intricate Greek, the most proper uses of grammar, and is perhaps the most annoying because of that. He uses intricate language design to tell us the story of Jesus as meaningfully as he can. And so this story is here for a reason. And perhaps that reason is Jesus is like the rest of us. He is a normal person like the rest of us. He is a sassy 12-year-old who, when he gets separated from his parents, has a snappy comeback to hide the fact that he is hurt and hides the fact that he has been alone for 3 days, living with the temple priests. But there is also a strong argument to be made for the fact that this is a snapshot in time when we see that Jesus has been focused on his ministry from his youth. That Jesus has been going to the temple, and not only has he been asking questions, he has been teaching people. He has been a meaningful leader in the temple from the tender age of 12. I didn't become a leader in the church until I was 26. My brothers still aren't leaders in the church, and he was 30 this year. We come at our own pace, and Jesus has been sprinting from the beginning. And it is possible that this message is, of course I am in my Father's house. I will do this work, and I am doing this work always. Do not be surprised when you find me here. The funny thing about the liturgy I prepared for this morning and the sermon that I had been crafting for this morning is that I was working on it even before Quincy's Christmas Eve sermon, which, if you remember, has some similar elements. Because Christmas has come and it has gone, and yet we are still here. The Christ story starts with Christmas at the end of a year. New Year's Day is on Tuesday, and we find ourselves moving forward into the age of 2019, whatever that means. But we know where we want to be on Sunday mornings or Saturday nights, or even on Wednesday mornings or Thursday evening, or whenever you find yourself here at the church. We come here not just because it's a holiday, not just because you should go to church on Christmas Eve. We are here because this is the place where we find God. We are here because this is a place where we know that we can find Jesus without fail. We are here because this is the space where we feel welcome, and this is the space where we feel the touch of the community around us. And in that community, we feel the embrace of God around us. People spend their whole lives searching for God, searching for that spectacular divine moment. I've only ever had one, and I forgot about it. When I was in 8th grade, I was going through confirmation class. And we went on a small retreat, and we were at a cabin, and we were encouraged to go out and pray. And I went out to a bridge that was maybe 4 feet long over a stream that was maybe 4 inches deep. And I stood on the bridge, and I looked out over the lake, and I prayed, and I shut my eyes tight. And when I opened them, the world had a strange, vibrant color to it. It was like someone had turned up the saturation on reality, and the leaves were more green than I had ever seen them, and the light off of the lake was blinding, and I could see into the water, and as quickly as it was there, it was gone. And for me, that is the closest I've ever felt to feeling the presence of the divine in my life, and I forgot about it. I forgot about it until my mom brought it up when I was in college, a full 8 years later. And I said, oh yeah, that did happen. It had completely slipped my mind. It isn't necessarily the powerful moments when Jesus breaks the bread and feeds 5,000 people, or when he lays hands on people or even just says, "You're healed, get up," and they come to life. Because if those were the moments, the disciples wouldn't be confused every time he does a miracle. They wouldn't be confused every single time Jesus explains his divine power. It isn't just these divine moments that fuel us. It is coming here on a Sunday morning, on a Saturday night, to be here in the kitchen preparing meals, to be in the knitting group preparing scarves and hats and gloves, to be at volleyball trying not to get hit, to be here singing with one another, listening to Scripture, listening to two different people share their hearts about what God has told them on a Sunday morning. We are here because this is what drives our faith. And so, on a perfectly normal Sunday, we hear a perfectly normal story about Jesus for perfectly normal people like us. And the good news of the gospel story is this: Jesus came at Christmas time to be in human form. And Jesus was raised like a normal child, getting separated from his parents, going to his bar mitzvah, going to the temple, going to the house of God. And the same is true for us. We are normal people who maybe didn't have as many guests at our birth. Maybe you had more. We came to church, and we listened to the stories, and we didn't all have bar mitzvahs, but we did, most of us, go through confirmation. And we're normal people here to be with God. Even Jesus made time to go to church. And he has the divine within him. Whenever we come to this place, whenever we meet in God's name, the good news is God is there for us. Even when we can't feel that presence, even when we can feel it as strong as someone touching your hand, God is with us in this ordinary space with us ordinary people. And isn't that amazing? This is the good news of the text. Thanks be to God.